I knew something was wrong the moment my daughter-in-law smiled at me without letting her eyes follow. A smile that floated like a piece of paper, weightless, insincere, already turning away before it reached me. At 78, you learn to recognize the danger of such smiles. They're the ones people wear when they're trying to move you aside without appearing cruel. I'd seen it before from strangers. I never expected to see it in my own son's home. The house smelled of cinnamon and pine, the kind of holiday scent you buy in a bottle to pretend warmth. I stood in the entryway, still holding my coat, because Amanda hadn't offered to take it. Daniel was somewhere upstairs, probably adjusting the lights for the 10th time. He always wanted Christmas perfect, though he rarely noticed who paid the price for that perfection. It used to be me. Now, apparently, it was Amanda, and she didn't appreciate the competition. "Oh, Eleanor," she said, brushing past me to fix a ribbon on the banister. "You came earlier than expected. I'm still organizing things." I had arrived exactly when she'd told me to, but I didn't argue. I never argued with her. Daniel always hated conflict, and I'd learned over the years that my silence bought peace in his home. A mother does desperate things for peace. My hands felt cold on the coat's fabric. "Where should I put this?" I asked gently. She looked at it as if I'd brought a stray dog inside. "Just somewhere. You know, we don't have much space in the hallway today." I walked to the small armchair in the corner, the one covered in a cream throw she always folded with military precision. I placed my coat carefully on its arm. Amanda watched me, cheeks tightening slightly, but she didn't say anything. Small victory, I thought. At my age, victories shrink. The living room was glowing with soft lights, garlands framing the windows, stockings so coordinated they could have been ordered from a catalog. My stocking, the one Daniel made in first grade, red yarn, crooked letters, was nowhere to be seen. I wondered if he'd thrown it out, or if Amanda had tucked it in a drawer out of sight, saving her decor from the shame of handmade things. "Mom," Daniel finally called from the stairs, his voice warm but distracted, as if already apologizing for the ways he'd disappoint me. He came down carrying a box of ornaments. "Good, you're here. Dinner's running late, so just make yourself comfortable." I tried to hug him. He let me, but briefly. His eyes darted toward Amanda as though asking, "Did I do it right?" It's a strange thing to be a mother and feel like a guest at the same time. I went into the kitchen, hoping to be useful. "Do you need help with anything?" Amanda didn't look up from the cutting board. "No, Eleanor. Everything is under control. I could peel potatoes. No, thank you. I could set the table. I said everything is under control." Her voice wasn't raised, but something in it pressed down on me, like a hand pushing a door shut from the other side. I stayed anyway. I didn't want to be alone in the living room pretending to admire decorations that weren't meant for me. I wiped a clean corner of the counter just to keep my hands busy. Amanda slid vegetables into the pan with a sharp movement. "Eleanor, you're in the way," she finally said. "Honestly, couldn't you rest somewhere? You look tired." It was said with a softness that felt like a blade wrapped in velvet. "I'm fine," I replied. But she'd already turned back to the stove, dismissing my presence as easily as one brushes away a piece of lint. Through the kitchen doorway, I saw Daniel laughing as he adjusted the star on the tree. He didn't look toward me. He didn't notice that I had stopped speaking, or that his wife had started sharpening the air between us with her tone. It's a quiet kind of pain, the one you can't show because showing it would make you seem dramatic, needy, unreasonable. So you swallow it, inch by inch, until it settles somewhere deep, like frost collecting in old window frames. I sat down at the small breakfast table. My hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from something much older than age. The knowledge that someone you love has been drifting from you for so long that you no longer know what warmth feels like. Across the room, the basement door stood slightly ajar. I didn't know yet that before the night ended, I would be on the other side of it, and Amanda would make sure I stayed there. For a while, I pretended to read the holiday cards displayed on the mantel, though half of them weren't even from people I knew. Amanda liked to arrange things that made her look beloved. She never understood that love rarely arrives in matching envelopes. Behind me, the kitchen noises continued. Sharp, hurried, frustrated sounds. Drawers opening too roughly. A pan placed onto the stove with more force than needed. I could feel her irritation bleeding through the walls like heat from a radiator. I had become, in her mind, a disturbance, a wrinkle in the fabric of the evening she wanted to present to the world. Daniel walked into the living room at last, adjusting his sleeves. "Mom, everything okay?" A simple question, but his eyes were already drifting away, searching for some candle out of place, some detail he could fix. I nodded anyway. Mothers learn early that sons hear only the answers that demand nothing of them. "I'm fine," I said. "Good," he murmured, already half-turned. "Dinner won't be long." That phrase, "won't be long," made my stomach tighten. It meant I would sit here, unheard, for however long it took. I'd grown too skillful at being quiet. Children's laughter came from upstairs, muffled by distance. The twins, 7-year-old boys I loved deeply, who rarely had the chance to be alone with me because Amanda always hovered like a lighthouse, keeping ships away from dangerous shores. Except I wasn't dangerous. I was simply inconvenient. I walked toward the staircase. Maybe I could say hello, maybe help them wrap the small gifts Daniel had mentioned. But before I reached the first step, Amanda's voice came from behind me, smooth and quick. "Oh, Eleanor, no. The boys are finishing homework. They get distracted easily." Homework on Christmas Eve. I turned, slowly. "I just wanted—" "We don't want them overstimulated before dinner," she added, already returning to the kitchen. "Please, just sit. Relax. Relax." As if I were a guest in some hotel lobby. I went back to the living room couch, though the cushions felt too firm, like they'd never been used for resting. I folded my hands in my lap. They looked small, older than I remembered. Through the doorway, I saw Amanda leaning close to Daniel, whispering something. He laughed softly, like a man in love does, but she wasn't smiling. Her mouth was tight, her eyes flicking toward me as if measuring how much space I occupied. I knew that look. It was the same one she used when rearranging furniture that didn't fit. After a few minutes, Daniel called. "Mom, could you hand me the tape from the drawer by the dining table?" I stood too quickly. My knees disagreed, but I steadied myself. I liked the idea of being useful, even in small ways. I walked toward the drawer. Amanda reached it first. She opened it, pulled out the tape, and placed it in Daniel's hand before I was even halfway there. Her smile toward me was thin. "It's okay, Eleanor. I've got it." I stopped in the middle of the dining room like a misplaced object. "Of course." Daniel barely noticed. Amanda returned to her chopping with renewed energy, her knife hitting the board a little too loudly. I wondered if she resented my attempt to help or simply resented my presence. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. I hovered near the dining table anyway, smoothing a wrinkle on the tablecloth. Amanda inhaled sharply. Please, don't touch that. I spent all morning getting everything perfect. Her words hung in the air for a moment. Perfect. Perfect meant not me. Why don't you rest downstairs? She suggested suddenly, her tone bright but brittle. It's warmer there and quiet. You always say your ears get tired from noise. I blinked. Downstairs? Yes, the basement lounge. Daniel fixed the light last week. There's a comfortable chair, and we won't be running around you. You'll be able to relax before dinner. I hesitated. I'm fine up here. Her lips twitched. I just think you'd be more comfortable. That word again. Comfortable. They always used it when they wanted to move me somewhere else. Daniel chimed in from across the room, not looking at me. Mom, maybe you should rest a bit. Dinner's taking longer than we thought. He didn't mean harm. But harm doesn't need intention. It only needs indifference. Amanda stepped toward the basement door, opening it wide. A faint draft rose from the stairs, cool and slightly damp. She gestured toward the darkness below, as though welcoming me into a guest suite. Come on, she said lightly. It'll only be for a little while. For a second, I imagined refusing, saying no with a firmness they wouldn't expect. But then Daniel's eyes flicked to me, tired, distracted, and I felt that old instinct again. Don't cause trouble. So I nodded. Amanda smiled, triumphant in a quiet, polished way. Good, she breathed. This will be better for everyone. I stepped toward the stairs. The hallway lights cast long shadows down into the basement. I heard the clinking of dishes, the rustling of wrapping paper, the faint hum of holiday music coming from the speaker in the living room. I placed my hand on the wooden railing. Amanda's voice followed me, soft as dust. Watch your step. The door creaked slightly as I descended. I didn't know then that she would close it behind me, or that the click I'd soon hear wouldn't be the house settling, but a lock sliding quietly into place. The basement steps creaked the way old bones do, softly at first, then louder the deeper you go. I held the railing with both hands, not because I was afraid of falling, but because I felt something shifting in the air behind me. A tension, a watchfulness. Amanda's presence at the top of the stairs pressed on my back like a palm. At the bottom, a single lamp cast a yellowish glow over the space. The basement wasn't frightening, just tired. Cardboard boxes sagged in corners. A few of Daniel's old tools hung on the wall, and one armchair sat near a folded treadmill. The air smelled faintly of dust and the detergent Amanda used on everything, as if trying to sterilize the world itself. I'll close the door a little, Amanda called down to me, sweet as syrup, just to keep the noise down while we finish things upstairs. I opened my mouth to answer, but the door was already swinging toward its frame. Not slamming. No, she wasn't foolish enough for that. Just a soft, polite shut. A sound someone could deny later if they needed to. I settled into the armchair. The fabric felt stiff, unused. My coat still hung in the living room upstairs where I'd left it. The basement air felt cool on my arms. But I folded my hands and tried to breathe evenly. I had spent a lifetime swallowing discomfort for the sake of others. Surely I could manage a little more. Above me, chairs scraped across the dining floor. Amanda's footsteps moved quickly, too quickly for a woman calmly preparing dinner. I could imagine the tightness around her eyes, the way she pressed her lips together when arranging things exactly to her liking. She had always been that type, polishing the surface, ignoring the foundation beneath. Then something changed in the sounds. A pause, a murmur. Daniel's voice, low and uncertain. "Is Mom okay down there?" Amanda's reply floated down, barely audible through the door. "She needed space. You know how she gets overwhelmed." Overwhelmed, a gentle insult folded neatly into concern. "She's fine, Daniel," Amanda added. "Let her rest." I stared at the lamp. Its bulb flickered slightly, not enough to worry about, just enough to make the shadows shift when I blinked. My heart beat slowly, but each beat felt heavier than the last. There was nothing technically wrong. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't cold enough to shiver. And yet something inside me felt displaced, as if I'd stepped out of my own life and couldn't find the door back in. Upstairs, the music started, jolly Christmas tunes wrapped in synthetic cheer. The bass thumped faintly through the ceiling. But within minutes, something changed again. The volume rose, then rose more. It wasn't just music anymore. It was noise, a wall of sound thick enough to swallow a human voice whole. I stood slowly. My knees cracked, the way they always did. But tonight, the sound felt sharper. I walked toward the stairs. The door above shimmered with faint light through the gap at the bottom. I lifted my hand and knocked lightly. No response. I knocked harder. Still nothing. The music pounded overhead, a steady rhythm that hid everything beneath it. I pressed my palm flat against the door and felt the vibration pass into my bones. A strange calm settled over me. Not panic, not fear. Something quieter, more dangerous. Clarity. I pushed the door handle. It didn't budge. Locked. Not by accident. Not by wind or draft or careless placement. Intentionally. I stood there, my hand still on the knob, feeling the truth bloom inside me like a slow, cold flower. This wasn't a misunderstanding, not an oversight, not even unkindness, which I might have forgiven. It was exclusion, deliberate, thorough, and shamefully easy for her to carry out. I stepped back. The lamp flickered again. I listened to the muffled celebration above me. Footsteps, laughter, glasses chiming, the distorted voices of children being told to keep their socks clean. I thought of Daniel. My Daniel. The boy who used to bring me pine cones from the yard because he thought they were treasures. The son who used to sit beside me in the evenings, asking if people's hearts got tired from loving too much. He hadn't even checked. Not really. He'd accepted Amanda's version of me without hesitation, without asking whether I needed anything, without noticing the edges of the lie. A mother sees many things. Tonight, I saw the shape of something I had never allowed myself to look at directly. I had raised a son who no longer looked for me, even when I disappeared into the next room. A low hum filled my ears, the music mixing with the blood rushing through them. I sat back down in the armchair. The shadows seemed longer now, the corners darker. My breath felt thin, not for lack of air, but for lack of place. I folded my hands again, carefully, gently, as if holding something fragile. Above me, the music grew louder still. I knew what was happening. Amanda wanted a quiet evening, and she wanted me to be invisible. Well, she'd gotten her wish. For now. I don't know how long I sat there. Time behaves strangely when no one is waiting for you. The music kept climbing, filling the air like something physical, something meant to drown out more than noise. My breathing grew shallow, not out of fear, but from the familiar sting of humiliation, the kind that settles in the bones long before you give it a name. Eventually, I stood again and walked to the foot of the stairs. I tried the door once more, even though I already knew it wouldn't open. It rattled slightly, like a stubborn drawer. I pressed my ear to it, though the music made listening pointless. Still, I tried. A lifetime of trying doesn't stop just because the world decides you've become an inconvenience. The steps beneath my feet were cold. A draft crept along the floor, thin and insistent. I rubbed my arms and looked around the room again, as if something might have changed while I sat. It hadn't. The same boxes, the same lamp, the same treadmill folded into silence like someone ashamed of itself. My fingers touched the knob again, gently this time. An old habit. Mothers touch things they can't fix. It's our way of apologizing for damage we didn't cause. I knocked once, light, testing, then harder. The sound vanished into the music above. I thought of calling Daniel's phone, but I'd left my bag upstairs. A foolish oversight, though I doubted it mattered. Even if I had called, even if the phone vibrated right beside him, would he have heard anything over the music? Would he have answered if he saw my name? He'd grown accustomed to hearing from me only when I needed something, never understanding that what I usually needed was simply to hear my son speak kindly. I walked back to the armchair, sinking into it more heavily this time. My heart wasn't racing, but something in me was tightening, as if a rope had been looped around my middle and pulled slowly, steadily, taking inches of breath each time. The basement door muffled laughter now. Amanda's sharp, polished laugh, the one she used in front of guests. It slid through the cracks like a thread of glass. Daniel's voice rose above it for a moment, cheerful and oblivious. I listened, hoping to catch even a flicker of concern, a question about me, a pause in the festivities. There was none. I let my eyes wander across the cement floor. I found the edge of an old holiday wreath in a box. Dusty, missing pine cones, the ribbon faded. It must have been mine, from years back, before Amanda replaced everything with cleaner, coordinated pieces. She didn't like old things unless they fit her sense of style. I suppose that included people. I leaned forward and touched the wreath gently. A small gesture, nothing more. But it reminded me that once, not too long ago, I had a place in this family. A real one. Not a decorative corner where I could be fitted in only if I didn't disturb the aesthetic. The light flickered again, longer this time. The shadows shifted. The house hummed faintly, the way it does when something electrical strains. A normal sound in an old home. But tonight, it felt pointed, as though the house itself was aware of what was happening under its roof. I sat up straighter. A small ache began behind my ribs. Not pain, exactly, but recognition. Recognition of something I had ignored for years. That love without respect quietly hollows you out until one day you find yourself sitting alone in a basement while your family celebrates overhead. My breathing steadied, not because things were better, but because sometimes the moment you stop denying the truth, your lungs find a way to work again. The music thudded on, busy and cheerful. It didn't sound cheerful to me anymore. It sounded like a barrier. I rose again, slowly, deliberately. My hand returned to the doorknob. I pressed it, not expecting anything. It held firm. Still, I whispered. Not loudly, not hoping anyone would hear, but simply because the words needed a place to land. I'm here. The house absorbed it. No response. I let my hand fall. The music swelled. Somewhere above, a glass broke, and everyone laughed. I stood in the dim light, understanding with a clarity that shook me far more than the locked door. They weren't going to come looking. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. I turned back toward the room and breathed in the cold air. And just like that, something inside me settled. not in surrender, but in certainty. I stayed standing because sitting felt too much like giving up. The cold of the cement floor rose through the soles of my shoes, a slow seep that reminded me how thin the barrier was between comfort and discomfort, between being included and being forgotten. I rubbed my arms again, not for warmth, but for steadiness. At my age, you learn the difference. The music above suddenly shifted, a louder song, full of bells and forced holiday cheer. Someone must have turned the volume up again. The basement door vibrated softly with each beat, as if the house were trying to keep me from remembering that silence existed anywhere else. I tried knocking again, not because I expected anything to change, but because dignity sometimes demands repetition. The knocks were swallowed instantly. No footsteps paused. No voices changed. If anything, the laughter grew brighter, sharper, like glass catching light. I stepped back and looked around the room more carefully, forcing myself to take everything in. A small metal shelving unit held old jars of screws and nails, most of them dusty. A folded laundry rack leaned against the wall, abandoned. A child's plastic sled hung from a hook, bright red even in the dim light. These were the forgotten corners of a house that had once been mine to enter freely. Now I stood in them, like a stranger. The light above me flickered again. This time it dimmed for several seconds. I looked up at it, half expecting it to give out entirely. The hum of the house changed pitch, a low groan that traveled through the pipes like a cough. I walked toward the back wall, where an old utility sink sat crookedly, its faucet stained. I touched the edge of the basin. It was cold, but not unpleasant. Somehow, grounding. I leaned on it for a moment, letting my weight settle. My shoulders ached from holding myself upright, but I wasn't ready to surrender the posture. I closed my eyes. Not to rest. Rest wasn't possible with that music, but to think clearly. I had spent too many years letting myself be rearranged for the sake of harmony. Harmony that never included my voice. Tonight was not really about the basement. It was about every quiet dismissal before this one, every time I'd stepped aside to make life easier for people who barely noticed. A sudden burst of laughter echoed above me, so loud it startled me. A man's voice, Daniel's, rose after it, cheerful, confident, utterly unaware. I imagined him showing off a dish Amanda prepared, or telling one of his recycled stories about work. I wondered if he knew I was missing from the room. I wondered whether the knowledge would matter. I moved back toward the stairs again. The railing felt colder this time. The doorknob resisted just as firmly. I pushed my shoulder against the door, lightly at first, then harder. It didn't move. Amanda hadn't even bothered to hide the decision. That told me something. It told me she didn't fear consequences. It told me she didn't expect Daniel to question her. I stepped back down the stairs, breathing in slowly, letting the air settle deep. And then something else happened. Something small, almost nothing, but it caught my attention. The music faltered. Just a second. A hiccup of sound. Then the house gave a small, uneven shudder, as if a sudden wind had pressed against it. When the music resumed, it was even louder, thick enough that it felt like pressure behind my eyes. Yet the brief interruption stayed with me. Houses don't make sounds for no reason. They complain before they give out. A switch struggling. A circuit tired. I pressed my hands against the sides of the stairwell, closing my eyes again. The cold of the wall steadied me. Think, Eleanor, I whispered to myself. Use what's left of yourself. Not strength. Not speed. Not outrage. Clarity. I walked back into the room and touched the lamp again. The flicker seemed worse. I followed the cord along the floor to the outlet, where an old extension strip hung too loosely. The wiring wasn't safe. Daniel had always meant to fix it, just like he'd meant to repair the loose railing, the broken porch tile, the attic draft. Good intentions that soften before they ever become action. The house hummed again, louder. Upstairs, the music crackled for a second time. A small, quiet thought formed within me. Maybe the house was about to hand me an opportunity. I stood still, listening. The basement was cold, dim, unfriendly, but it was patient. More patient than the people upstairs. And in the patience, I felt something I had not felt in a long while. An opening. Not yet visible, not yet certain, but moving toward me like a slow change in weather. I placed my hand on the edge of the old wreath box and steadied myself. Whatever came next, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I would not remain where Amanda meant to keep me. I stayed close to the lamp for a moment, watching its trembling glow. The flicker had grown stronger, as if the bulb were breathing unevenly. The house above me kept humming with electricity, unsteady, restless. It reminded me of someone trying too hard to keep control, overextending until the strain begins to show. A familiar pattern. My knees ached, so I moved slowly toward the far wall, where a stack of storage boxes slumped against one another. I touched one lightly. The cardboard sagged under my fingers. Nothing down here was meant to be looked at. Things were placed here so they wouldn't interrupt Amanda's perfect surfaces upstairs. I wondered whether she thought of me the same way. The music suddenly spiked, so loud the floor itself vibrated under my shoes. I felt the thumping in my chest, not from fear but from sheer force. It was astonishing how much sound people could use to hide what they didn't want to hear. "Daniel," I murmured, though he couldn't hear me. "If you looked for me now, would you wonder why you didn't find me?" The question had no comfort attached to it. Some truths don't ask permission before they settle inside you. I walked to the stairs once more, compelled by habit. I touched the doorknob again. The metal was cold, solid, unmoving. The lock didn't rattle. It had been closed carefully, deliberately. That knowledge didn't shock me anymore. It only sharpened something inside me, a blade I hadn't used in years, a kind of inward precision. I knocked anyway, once, twice, a third time, louder. Nothing. The music drowned every possibility of being heard, and then, gradually, I realized something else. No one upstairs would question the loud music. Guests often expect chaos during celebrations. Children shout, people laugh, dishes clatter. Amanda could even say she turned the volume up to add atmosphere. And Daniel, exhausted from trying to make things perfect, would simply nod. I stepped away from the stairs. The basement light wavered again, then steadied, then dimmed. Not fully out, but thin, fragile. I listened. A soft crackle moved through the ceiling, like static running along a wire. Houses always warn you before they fail. I approached the utility panel on the back wall. Daniel once bragged about replacing a fuse here, though judging by the rust around the edges, he'd done less than he claimed. I didn't open the panel. I knew better. But I stood close, listening to the faint, irregular buzz inside it. An overstressed system, straining under the weight of too many plugged-in miracles upstairs. Another surge of music hit, but it sounded distorted now, as if the speakers were struggling. I breathed out slowly. Maybe the house wasn't just offering me an opening. Maybe it was choosing sides. I walked back toward the center of the room and lowered myself onto the armchair again. My body felt heavy, but it was a steady heaviness, the kind that comes from acceptance, not defeat. The cold seeped into my legs, but I didn't move from it. I let myself feel the weight of the moment. Above me, chairs scraped, glasses clinked, footsteps passed. A small shout, one of the twins, pierced through the music for an instant. Then someone turned the volume up again, covering it all. I looked at the basement door, a faint sliver of light glowing beneath it. That tiny strip of brightness felt less like hope and more like a reminder. People often leave just enough light to convince themselves they haven't done something cruel. Another flicker. This time the lamp dimmed almost to darkness. The hum of the house shifted, a low rumble pulsing unevenly. I stayed very still, listening. My breath fogged faintly in the colder air settling across the basement. Then a sharp sound cracked overhead, brief, metallic, like a wire snapping. The music sputtered mid-song. Lights from under the door flashed, then blinked off entirely. Silence. A real silence, deep and sudden, like the house had taken one long breath and held it. For the first time that night, I could hear my own heartbeat. I stood slowly. The dim basement felt different now, as if space had cleared around me. Shadows deepened, but didn't frighten me. I stepped toward the stairs, each movement deliberate. My hand found the railing. I climbed the first step. The second. On the third, I reached out and touched the doorknob. Still locked. But upstairs, the music was gone. The lights were out. Conversations had stopped. The household that had drowned me out had abruptly lost its voice. I pressed my palm flat against the door. The wood felt still. Very still. Whatever happened next, the house had given me something precious, the quiet in which to move, to think, to act, and I intended to use it. The darkness above me wasn't complete. Faint slivers of winter evening leaked through the cracks of the doorframe. But the sudden quiet was absolute. It wrapped around the house like a heavy blanket, swallowing the echo of the music, the laughter, the bright clatter of celebration. I didn't hear anyone moving yet. Shock has its own silence. My hand stayed on the doorknob. Without the music drowning everything, I could hear the soft texture of sounds, the refrigerator's low hum, the faint ticking of the thermostat, a distant rustle of someone shifting upstairs. Life had returned to its natural volume, which meant, for the first time that night, my voice might actually travel. I knocked once. Firm, not desperate. The sound moved upward into the darkness, unchallenged. I waited. Nothing. I knocked again, louder. The wood carried the sound, but still no footsteps approached. A part of me wondered if Amanda was standing on the other side, perfectly still, hoping I'd think no one was there. She had that kind of discipline, quiet cruelty wrapped in civility. I straightened my back and climbed one more step, letting my chest rest close to the door. "Daniel," I said softly. The basement carried my voice upward, unfiltered. Still no answer. I tried the doorknob again, knowing it wouldn't open. It held firm, but something about it felt loose. Not unlocked, but slightly shifted, as if the frame had relaxed when the power cut. Old houses change shape in the cold. Locks behave differently when the structure sighs. I pressed the door with my palm. A small give. Not much, but more than before. I pushed harder. Not enough to break anything, just enough to test the boundary. The wood resisted, but not with the absolute certainty it had earlier. That tiny change rooted itself inside me, steadying my breath. Quiet systems, once strained, always show a weakness. Upstairs, voices finally rose, murmurs, confused, overlapping. Someone gasped. A child asked a question. Amanda's voice cut through, sharp, trying to gather control. She didn't sound frightened about the power outage. She sounded inconvenienced. I listened. "Stay calm," she told someone. "It's just the breaker. Daniel will fix it." Daniel. Always repairing things too late, too quickly, too badly. Footsteps approached the basement door. My breath paused, though my face remained composed. But instead of unlocking it, the footsteps hesitated, then turned away. Amanda again, no doubt. She didn't want me coming up in the middle of her perfect holiday. Even now, in the dark, her priority was order, not people. A strange peace settled into me. Not forgiveness, just comprehension. I waited another few seconds, then tried the door gently with both hands. This time I pressed lower, where the frame was older, a little warped from years of winter air. The lock held, but the bottom corner shifted more than it should. I exhaled slowly. The house hadn't simply chosen sides, it had created a seam. I stepped back, bracing my shoulder, and pushed again. Not hard, just steady. Measured pressure, the way you coax a stuck drawer rather than fight it. A faint crack sounded along the frame, not loud enough to draw attention upstairs, just a small private sound between me and the wood. My heart didn't race. Age teaches you the value of patience over force. Everything that opens does so at its own pace. I pressed one more time, feeling the give deepen by a fraction of an inch. I whispered to the door. Not a prayer, not a plea, just a truth. "You won't hold me." The house absorbed the words. I stepped back into the dimness, waiting for the moment when pressure, time, and silence would work together. And I knew that moment was coming. The quiet upstairs shifted again. Furniture scraped lightly. Someone bumped into something. A child whimpered. Darkness makes even confident people clumsy. Without the music to hide behind, the house revealed every small sound. Footsteps pacing, a drawer opening, the soft thud of something being set down too quickly. I imagined Amanda trying to keep control of the situation, her voice a tight thread holding the edges together. Daniel's tone rose once, irritated, not alarmed. "Where's the flashlight? Didn't we keep it in the pantry?" A muffled answer. Amanda. Short. Defensive. I stood near the stairs listening, letting the information settle. If they were preoccupied with the outage, their attention was divided. People rarely guard what they assume is already contained. I touched the doorknob again. The metal felt colder now, as if the temperature had dropped just enough to tighten the lock but loosen the frame. I pressed my shoulder lightly against the wood. The bottom corner moved. Not much, but more than earlier. Patience, I reminded myself. Patience has teeth when used correctly. Someone upstairs approached the door again. This time, Daniel, I thought. His steps were heavier, less deliberate. He stopped right in front of me. I could sense his weight above the threshold. For a moment, I imagined him unlocking it, opening the door, seeing me there. His mother, alone in the dark. But that wasn't how Daniel lived his life anymore. He said things like, "Mom is fine," even when he wasn't certain. He trusted convenience more than clarity. He rattled the doorknob. I held my breath. He tried again, harder this time, then sighed in frustration. "Why is this jammed?" Jammed. A comfortable word to cover something uglier. Amanda's voice floated over his shoulder. "It sticks sometimes. Don't bother with it now. We need to check the breaker. Please, Daniel. Focus. He hesitated, long enough for me to hope, but then his footsteps drifted away. I let out a slow breath, steady as a held note. The silence returned. The faint glow under the door barely illuminated the lowest step. I climbed it again and placed my hands flat on the wood, feeling its unevenness. Old houses carry memory in their frames. They shift with the seasons, relax after storms, surrender small weaknesses that no decorator ever acknowledges. I leaned my weight against the center of the door, not forcing, not straining, just pressure, a steady push. The frame creaked softly, a quiet complaint, but a promising one. I adjusted my stance, braced one foot on the stair, and pushed again. Years of lifting grocery bags and grandkids had kept my shoulders stronger than people assumed. The wood groaned, only a breath, but that breath meant everything. Upstairs, Amanda called out sharply, "Daniel, be careful! Don't flip the wrong switch." He grumbled something back. Their tension, so focused on each other, left a widening space around me. A space where the house and I were the only ones paying attention to what mattered. I tightened my palm on the doorknob, using it as leverage, and pushed once more. A crack formed along the lower hinge, not a loud sound, just a subtle shift, like a joint being eased after stiffness. Then I stopped. Not because I was afraid, but because pushing blindly is what careless people do. I was not careless tonight. I wanted the door to open on my terms, quietly, without spectacle, without giving anyone upstairs a reason to turn around. Another set of footsteps passed in the hallway, quick, clipped. Amanda again. She was speaking too fast, too loudly for the situation. Fear disguised as competence. "Daniel, just fix it," she snapped. He didn't answer. I placed my fingertips against the edge of the frame and felt the cold draft slipping through the narrow seam I'd created. Thin, but real. I stayed there, leaning just enough to keep the pressure. The hinge whispered again. A warning? No. An invitation. The house had softened. Soon, very soon, the door would do the same. I stood poised in the half-dark, breath slow, hands steady, waiting for the moment when effort and timing would meet. And I knew they would. The house above me grew restless. Not loud, restlessness rarely is, but uneven. Footsteps in the wrong rhythm, voices pitched slightly higher than comfort allows, a cabinet door closing too hard. People lose their grace in the dark. Even Amanda couldn't hide the strain in her voice now. "Daniel, did you find the breaker?" she called. "No," he answered, annoyed. "It's not here. I thought—" "You thought wrong," she snapped. "Hurry." I could almost see her jaw tightening, the way she tilted her chin when she felt control slipping. It gave me a strange steadiness. People reveal themselves quickest when the lights go out. I placed my hand on the door again. The frame was cooler now. Colder air seeped through the seam I'd worked open. The house wasn't pretending anymore. Its shifting bones were laid bare. I pressed gently, testing. The hinge answered with a soft, complaining click. Another inch, maybe less, but enough to tell me I wasn't trapped, only delayed. I stepped back for a moment and let my breath settle. My legs were stiff, but not weak. Weariness I could endure. My life had trained me for that. What I wouldn't endure anymore was the quiet way I'd taught myself to disappear. A soft clatter echoed above. Someone had dropped something. Amanda's voice followed, sharp enough to cut through the floorboards. "Careful. That's fragile. Honestly, Daniel, Her frustration was almost comforting. It meant she was too preoccupied to think of me. I pressed the side of my palm against the doorframe and pushed again, slowly, steadily. The wood flexed just slightly at the bottom, where age had softened it. I felt the shift before I heard it, a faint release of tension, like fabric stretching. I paused, not from fear, from strategy. Patience, Eleanor, not one moment earlier than needed. Upstairs, a child whimpered. I could tell which one, Evan, the more sensitive twin. He didn't like the dark. Daniel murmured something to him, reassuring. His voice had warmth in it, the kind he'd forgotten to use with me. Amanda interrupted almost immediately. Stop comforting him and fix the power. Her tone explained everything about the life Daniel lived now. The hinge creaked again, quieter this time, as if the house were adjusting to the inevitable. I leaned my weight into the pressure, subtle, controlled. My shoulder pushed against the warmest part of the door where hands touched it daily. Another tiny shift. I could feel the difference, not dramatic, but undeniable. The seam widened enough that the cold draft brushed my cheek. I exhaled slowly, letting the certainty root itself deeper. Soon, voices above me tangled again. Maybe Mom turned off something downstairs, Daniel said suddenly. The words tightened the air. Amanda responded instantly. She's resting. Leave her. Resting. In a locked basement. That sentence alone could have shattered something inside me, years ago. Tonight, it only steadied me. Daniel hesitated. But, Daniel, she cut him off, the way someone snuffs out a candle. Not now. He quieted. I braced myself once more and gave the door a slow, firm push. The hinge made a small cracking sound. Not loud, not risky, but final in a quiet way. A boundary shifting. The opening wasn't visible yet, but I could feel it. A loosening, a surrender along the frame. The kind of moment when an old house stops holding its breath. I stepped back down 2 stairs, letting the dark settle around me. My heart beat steady, not fast. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't panicking. I was preparing. The door was almost ready. And once it opened, I knew exactly what I would do. I would walk out. Calmly. Quietly. And let them see what they had left sitting in the dark. When the door finally loosened enough for me to feel the frame shift under my hand, I didn't push harder. Not yet. I stepped away from it entirely, letting the house settle around me. Noise had returned upstairs. Daniel searching through drawers. Amanda snapping orders she disguised as concerns. The boys whispering nervously. The outage had broken the rhythm of the evening, but not the pattern of their lives. I stood near the old utility sink, listening. My breath came slow, steady. I wasn't thinking about escape anymore. I was thinking about what would follow. The moment I stepped through that doorway, nothing in my relationship with them could go back to its original shape. And strangely, the thought didn't frighten me. It relieved me. I'd spent years avoiding conflict, believing compromise could maintain peace. But peace without dignity is only another form of silence. Tonight, the silence had finally shown its teeth. The lamp flickered again, weaker than before. A faint, metallic click echoed through the ceiling. Daniel had opened the breaker panel, fumbling around. I knew him well enough to imagine the crease forming between his eyebrows, the same expression he made as a boy when a puzzle confused him. Amanda hovered nearby, impatient, as if annoyance could substitute for competence. "Just flip them all," she urged. "That's not how it works," he muttered. Their voices drifted closer, then further, depending on where they moved. No one mentioned me again, not even in passing. I approached the stairs and rested my hand on the railing. The wood felt smoother than the cold floor. I climbed 2 steps, placed my palm on the door once more, and pushed, not with force, but with the steady pressure of someone who had already made up her mind. The hinge yielded a fraction more. The seam widened at the bottom. I saw a faint line of hallway light slide across the step. Not the bright overheads, they were still out, but the glow of someone's flashlight passing by. I froze, listening. Amanda's voice floated near the door. "Hurry, Daniel. The guests are waiting." Guests. People laughing, eating, celebrating, unaware that the only grandmother in the house was meant to be invisible for the evening. Daniel answered with a tired groan. "I'm doing what I can." Their footsteps faded again. The hallway went dim. I braced my shoulder against the door, angled low, and pushed one last time. A soft crack echoed, quiet but final. The frame shifted enough that the latch loosened from its snug fit. Not open, but ready. I stepped down, letting the darkness swallow my movement. The house creaked as the temperature dropped another degree, old wood adjusting. Then silence returned. A deep, waiting silence. I tightened my grip on the railing. I knew what I would do the moment the door opened. Not argue, not shout. Those things were for people still trying to win something. I wasn't winning anything tonight. I was reclaiming what had been mine all along, but not here, not in this house. When the power returned, and it would eventually, they'd expect me to thank them for checking on me. They'd explain the lock as an accident. They'd cover the truth with softness, assuming my age made me grateful for any crumbs of kindness. I'd let them speak, calmly, and then I'd walk out of this home with the kind of finality that doesn't need raised voices. My life would not end in anyone's basement. I turned my gaze toward the door again, the faint seam of light glowing like a thin, patient promise. Soon. And once I stepped through it, the first thing I would do was leave this house behind, not in anger, but with the dignity they had forgotten I possessed. When the door finally gave way, with a soft, tired click instead of a dramatic crack, I didn't push it open all at once. I eased it, just enough for my hand to slip through. The hallway was dim, lit only by the faint beam of a dropped flashlight rolling lazily near the wall. Amanda and Daniel were nowhere in sight. Their voices echoed from deeper in the house, frustrated and tangled. I stepped out quietly, closing the basement door behind me, not fully, but enough to erase the evidence of its struggle. My shoes touched the hardwood floor, and for a moment I simply stood there, breathing in the stillness. The air upstairs was warmer, though not welcoming. I felt the residue of the evening clinging to the walls, perfume, food, tension. The boys were huddled on the couch, knees pulled to their chests. Their silhouettes looked small in the dim glow. They didn't see me at first, and I didn't speak. Children sense the truth faster than adults. I watched their faces shift the moment they noticed me. "Grandma?" Evan whispered. I pressed a finger gently to my lips. Not fear, just calm. They nodded, trusting me instinctively, something their parents had forgotten how to do. I walked past them toward the front hallway. My coat was still draped over the small armchair. Amanda had moved everything else into perfect order, but she'd left my coat untouched, as if it didn't matter enough to interfere with her arrangement. I lifted it slowly, smoothing the fabric over my arm. They were still arguing in the kitchen. "It shouldn't be this complicated, Daniel." "I'm doing my best, Amanda." Their voices rose, then fell, clashing like dull metal. They were too busy managing their performance of responsibility to notice the quiet shift happening just steps away. I took my purse from the console table. It felt heavier than usual, not physically, but symbolically. Insurance forms, bank statements, medical paperwork, all things I'd carried for years without fully realizing how vulnerable they made me. I had allowed others access to pieces of my life simply because I was afraid of appearing difficult. That fear was gone. I reached for the front door. The latch clicked gently, respectful of the silence around it. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me with a soft finality that felt more powerful than any slammed argument. The cold air met my face like a truth I had needed for years, clear, bracing, uncomplicated. I walked down the front steps and onto the driveway. Snow had started to fall, thin and delicate. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't judge or question. I didn't look back. My car sat at the curb, a modest old sedan. Daniel always said he'd replace one day. I opened the door, sat down, and rested my hands on the steering wheel. My fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the release of something long held tight. I didn't start the engine right away. I let the silence of the neighborhood settle around me. Christmas lights from nearby houses glowed softly. Somewhere a dog barked once, then stopped. Life continued. Inside the house behind me, I heard Amanda's voice, sharp, commanding, followed by a sudden pause. Maybe she had finally noticed the silence near the basement door. Maybe she had realized the house didn't hold me anymore. I pulled my seatbelt across my chest and clicked it into place. There were still practical things to do: bank visits, document changes, conversations spoken with precision instead of pleading. But those would come tomorrow. Tonight, all I needed was to drive away from the place where I had allowed myself to shrink. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine hummed to life, steady and familiar. And I backed out of the driveway without hesitation. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Not excitement, not anger, just a steady, grounded sense that the choices before me were mine alone. I made tea, the simple black kind I'd been drinking since I was a young woman, and sat at the kitchen table with my folder of papers. Bills, policies, account authorizations, all the quiet machinery of a life. I looked at each document the way one might examine an heirloom, without sentiment, but with respect for what it once meant. I had allowed Daniel access to too many things out of habit, not trust. At the time, it felt like love. Today, it felt like negligence toward myself. I dressed, warm clothes layered with care, and drove to the bank when it opened. The clerk recognized me, the older ones always did, and greeted me kindly. I explained, calmly and plainly, what I needed. Removal of Daniel as an authorized signer, revision of beneficiaries, new protections on withdrawals. The clerk listened without judgment. People who work with aging customers learn early that stories often live beneath simple requests. "Are you sure you want to make these changes, Mrs. Hayes?" she asked softly. "Yes," I said. "Completely." My voice didn't shake. She nodded and began typing. 30 minutes later, the updates were complete. She handed me the new paperwork, neatly stamped. I thanked her and walked out into the crisp winter air feeling, not triumphant, but aligned with myself in a way I had forgotten was possible. Next was my attorney's office. a modest building, nothing grand. He had helped me after my husband died and had always spoken to me like a person, not a task. When I told him I needed to update my will and restructure certain assets, he didn't pry. He only asked, "What brought this on?" in a careful tone meant to offer space without pressure. "Perspective," I said. He smiled, understanding more than I admitted. We reviewed my options, slowly, thoroughly, in language even a tired mind could hold. I removed Daniel and Amanda from certain provisions, not out of spite, but out of clarity. I created a trust with conditions I knew were fair. My attorney nodded as he wrote. "You're making thoughtful decisions," he murmured. "I've had a long night to think," I replied. Forms were signed, copies printed, pens clicked shut. The kind of final steps that change a life quietly, without anyone outside the room noticing. I drove home with the folder beside me, thicker now with revised documents. Snow fell in soft, sparse flakes, almost gentle. I parked in my driveway and sat for a moment, letting the engine hum fade into silence. When I stepped inside my house, the phone was already ringing. Daniel. His name on the caller ID felt heavier than it used to. I answered, calm. "Hello, Daniel." "Mom, where did you go last night?" His voice was tight, strained, more confused than worried. "We were looking for you. Amanda panicked. The boys were upset." I let the silence sit for 2 heartbeats. "I left," I said simply. "But why? You didn't tell us anything." "I wasn't expected to," I replied. He breathed in sharply. "Mom, come on. It was just the power going out. We didn't know you were downstairs." Another quiet pause. I didn't rush to fill it. "Things happened that shouldn't have happened," I said finally. "I'm not calling to argue, Daniel. I just want you to understand that I'm taking care of myself now." "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, "you'll see some changes." The line went silent, except for his uneven breathing. "Mom, what did you do?" I didn't answer the question directly. I didn't need to. "I'll talk to you later, Daniel." I hung up gently, without anger. Then I sat at my kitchen table again, folded my hands, and let the quiet settle around me. For the first time in years, it felt like my own quiet, not the kind someone else forced on me, but the kind I had chosen. Daniel didn't come by that morning. He didn't come in the afternoon either. It wasn't until early evening, when the winter sky had dimmed into that gray-blue softness, that I heard a car door slam outside. Not hurried. More like a man who wasn't sure what he was walking into. I stayed seated at the table, hands folded, breathing slow. Let him come to me for once. The door opened without a knock. Daniel still had his old house key, and he stepped inside with a tension he tried and failed to hide. "Mom?" he called quietly. "In here," I answered. He appeared in the doorway, coat unzipped, hair wind-tousled. There was something boyish in the way he looked at me. Uncertain, guilty, defensive. A bewildering mix. He sat across from me but didn't take off his coat, as if not planning to stay long. He cleared his throat. "Amanda thinks we should talk." "Amanda often thinks for you," I said gently. Not cruel, just honest. His jaw tightened. "Mom, please. This isn't easy." "No," I said. "It isn't." The silence between us stretched. He looked around my kitchen as though seeing it for the first time. Everything in it was simple. Clean counters, a kettle cooling on the stove, a small plant by the window. No chaos, no ceremony, just a life. He finally exhaled. "Why didn't you say anything last night? Why didn't you call out?" I held his eyes. I did, Daniel. You just couldn't hear me. He blinked, confusion crossing his face. I mean, when the lights went out, I was already locked in, I said. His shoulders rose, then froze. Locked? Mom, no, that's not what happened. The door sticks. You know that. Yes, I said. It stuck because someone turned the key. He shook his head quickly, too quickly. Mom, listen. Amanda said something convenient, I interrupted softly. And you believed her, as you usually do. He leaned forward, voice cracking. Are you saying we meant to leave you down there? That we didn't care? I'm saying, I replied, that no one noticed I wasn't at the table. Not for minutes. Not for hours. You were all celebrating just fine without me. That's not fair, he whispered. No, I agreed. It isn't. He flinched at that, like a man whose reflection suddenly didn't match the picture he'd held of himself. He rubbed his forehead, breathing unevenly. Mom, I'm sorry you felt abandoned. I wasn't feeling it, I said. I was abandoned. There's a difference. He closed his eyes as if the truth stung. Maybe it did. I kept my voice steady. Daniel, I'm not angry. I'm tired. I'm tired of shrinking myself so you don't feel pulled between your wife and your mother. I'm tired of being the one who bends, every time, so your life stays smooth. He opened his eyes slowly. What do you want from me? Nothing, I said. Truly nothing. I've spent years wanting things, from you, from Amanda, from the idea of what family should look like. I let that wanting cloud my judgment. Last night cleared it. He swallowed hard. Mom, we didn't mean you didn't look, I said. That's the truth I can't ignore anymore. A long silence followed. Not angry, just heavy. Daniel stared at the table, hands twisting his gloves. Are you cutting us out? He finally asked. I'm choosing myself, I answered. Whatever consequences that brings are simply consequences. He nodded slowly, the kind of nod a man gives when he doesn't approve, but understands he no longer has the authority to change anything. I love you, Mom, he said at last, voice hoarse. I smiled, small but real. I know, but love without attention is just a habit. His eyes glassed over, though he blinked the shine away. He stood, hesitating like a boy afraid to step out into the cold. I didn't move to comfort him. Comfort had become a language I only offered when earned. He nodded once more and left. The door clicked shut. And the quiet that followed belonged entirely to me. For several days after Daniel left my kitchen in that small, defeated silence, the phone remained unusually quiet. Not one call from Amanda. Only a single text from Daniel, short, polite, carefully worded, as if he were afraid of choosing the wrong tone. I didn't answer immediately. I didn't rush for anything anymore. The house settled around me differently now. Not empty, just honest. The quiet no longer came from being forgotten. It came from being alone by choice. There is a dignity in that kind of solitude, one I had denied myself for years. I found myself waking earlier, without the heaviness that used to cling to my mornings. I made oatmeal the way I liked, not the way Amanda insisted was better for my blood sugar. I sat by the window with my tea and watched the street come alive slowly. Dog walkers, the mail truck, the neighbor scraping frost from his windshield. Ordinary rhythms, but they felt like something steadier than anything I had shared with my family lately. I spent one afternoon going through drawers, not sorting out of sadness, but reclaiming. Old scarves, photographs, greeting cards from friends long gone. I stacked things neatly, letting memory come without flooding me. The past didn't hurt. It simply existed. On Wednesday, I walked to the community center 3 blocks away. The cold air bit at my cheeks, but my legs carried me without protest. Inside, the receptionist recognized me and asked if I was there for the knitting group. I said yes, though I hadn't joined them in years. Amanda always told me those meetings were too much trouble and that she and Daniel would keep me busy enough. I believed her then. I don't anymore. The knitting group welcomed me like I had never left. Women my age and older, their hands steady, their voices soft but sure. We talked about yarn, not families, patterns, not disappointments. It was a small thing, yet I felt something inside me shift toward warmth. That evening, I baked a loaf of bread. Not because anyone was coming over, but because I wanted the smell of something alive filling my kitchen. When I sliced into it later, the crust cracked gently, and the steam rose like a sigh. I ate in silence, savoring every bite. 2 days later, Daniel came by again, this time knocking first. I didn't rush to the door. When I opened it, he stood there uncertainly, hands deep in his pockets. "Mom, can we talk?" "I think we already did," I said softly. He nodded, accepting the boundary. He didn't step inside. He didn't push. He just looked at me, a searching look, as if trying to understand a version of me he'd never bothered to see before. "I miss you," he murmured. I breathed in slowly. "You miss the part of me that didn't ask anything of you." His mouth tightened, not in anger, but in understanding. He wasn't ready to answer that, and I didn't force him. Growth comes quietly, or not at all. He asked if I needed anything: groceries, medicine, help with the car. I smiled gently. "I have everything I need." He swallowed, nodded again, then wished me good night. He waited a moment longer than necessary, as if hoping I'd change my mind and invite him in. I didn't. Not yet. Maybe not soon. After he left, I wrapped myself in a warm shawl and stepped onto the porch. The night was crisp, the stars clear. I stood there breathing in the cold air, feeling it settle cleanly in my lungs. For the first time in many years, my life felt like it belonged to me, not in pieces, not as a function of someone else's plans, but whole, steady, and quietly mine. I went back inside, closed the door gently, and let the house hold me the way it always had, without expectation, without condition. The following week passed quietly, each day unfolding with the kind of steadiness I hadn't felt in years. I kept to my routines: morning tea, a slow walk, a chapter of whatever book my eyes could manage. I filled my time not with distraction, but with presence. My own presence. Something I had abandoned without noticing. On Friday, a letter arrived, thick envelope, Daniel's handwriting. I stood at the kitchen counter and opened it carefully. Inside was a short note, written with hesitation in every stroke. "Mom, I understand you needed space. I'm trying to see things the way you saw them. Amanda." Well, she's not ready to talk about it. But I want to try. I don't want to lose you. I read it twice, maybe 3 times. Not because it moved me to tears, but because it felt like watching someone learn to walk again. Unsteady, but trying. Trying mattered. Trying had always mattered more than he ever realized. Still, I didn't reply immediately. Some wounds aren't healed by quick mending. They need time, air, and distance to settle into something that won't reopen at the first strain. That evening, I stepped out into the yard to shake off the last snow from my walkway. My shovel scraped softly along the ground, each stroke rhythmic and oddly comforting. The cold air was sharp, but honest. I found myself humming, a low, tuneless thing I hadn't done since before Amanda came into our lives with her perfect smile and perfectly sharpened expectations. Halfway through clearing the path, I saw movement across the street. My neighbor, Mrs. Langford, waved from her porch. She'd always been kind, though we rarely spoke. Tonight, she crossed the road slowly, bundled in scarves. "Eleanor, I haven't seen you at the market lately," she said, her breath fogging between us. "I've been taking care of a few things," I replied. She nodded, studying me quietly, the way another older woman can, with recognition, not intrusion. "You look different," she said finally. "Lighter." I smiled a little. Maybe I am. We talked a few minutes about the weather, the neighborhood, small things that felt solid and human. When she went back inside, the path before me looked brighter somehow, as if the snow itself had softened. Later, in the house, I sat at my table with Daniel's letter beside me. I didn't hold anger anymore, not even bitterness. I simply held truth, and truth no longer frightened me. What happened in that basement would never disappear, but it didn't need to become a story of revenge or punishment. It was a turning point, nothing more, nothing less. A point where I stopped shrinking, a point where I remembered that dignity is not something others give you, it is something you protect. I wrote Daniel a small reply. Not long, not emotional, just honest. I'm safe. I'm well. I need time. If you wish to repair things, start with seeing me. Truly seeing me. I sealed the envelope and set it by the door. Then I made myself a cup of tea, letting the steam warm my face. The house was quiet, but not the old kind of quiet. The forced, lonely kind. This was a chosen quiet. A peaceful one. The kind a woman earns after years of being unheard. I took my tea to the window and looked out at the street, glowing faintly under the street lamps. The world felt wider than it had in a long while, and I felt wider inside it. If someone had told me years ago that freedom at 78 would feel like this, calm, steady, slow, I wouldn't have believed them. But here it was. Mine. And if you find yourself trapped by silence, by fear, by people who forget your worth, remember this. The moment you decide to step out of the darkness, even quietly, the whole shape of your life begins to change. Sometimes all it takes is opening your own door.